Tonight on Politicat, results out of Iowa and looking forward to New Hampshire. What's next in the 2020 race?
And NSC firings. We look at the aftermath of the Trump impeachment.
Plus, a Brexit update. Where is the UK in its process of leaving the EU? All that and more coming up tonight on Politicat. It's your politics
right now. Good evening and welcome to Politicat. I'm Alexa McHale.
And I'm Justin Sweetwood. We start tonight with the results from the Iowa caucus. The first state in the 2020 primary season fell into chaos when an app intended to help precinct captains started malfunctioning. That caused complete results from Iowa to be delayed until yesterday, a full week after the caucus.
In the end, Pete Buttigieg narrowly defeated Bernie Sanders, taking 26.2% over Bernie's 26.1%. Elizabeth Warren came in third with 18%, and Joe Biden took fourth with 15%. Now all eyes are on New Hampshire. Can Pete and Bernie hold their lead, or will Biden pick up some steam? NNN's Megan Leibowitz sets the scene from the Granite State.
With the first primary in the nation on Tuesday, candidates are making their final pitches to New Hampshire voters. Senator Bernie Sanders and former Mayor Pete Buttigieg came out of the Iowa caucuses on top, leaving other candidates to try to explain to voters why they're still in it to win it.
We got 55 states and territories to go. I'm in it for the long haul.
From restaurants,
we have 3 votes right at this table,
to rallies,
hello, Concord,
to town halls.
Thank you.
Candidates are on the road across New Hampshire in one last push to convince voters that they're the best equipped to top the ticket.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. It means a lot.
Although many voters wait in long lines to see their favorite candidate, some voters are still undecided.
The jury's still out, but leaning towards Amy or Pete.
Some undecided voters are choosing between progressives like Senator Warren and moderates like Senator Klobuchar. These candidates are traveling across New Hampshire to make their final pitches to voters before they cast their ballots on Tuesday.
I'm between Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar.
I'm looking at Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, and probably Tom Steyer.
According to a recent New Hampshire polling average by Real Clear Politics, Sanders is the frontrunner, followed by Buttigieg, Warren, then Biden. Some candidates appear to try to detract attention from poor polling numbers when asked questions by reporters.
I didn't start by doing polls a year ago, and I still don't do polls.
For these candidates, it's all about who can make the best last-minute pitch.
At a moment like this, telling Americans that you've either got to be for a revolution or you got to be for the status quo is telling most of us we don't belong.
It's going to take big structural change. Are you ready for that?
Some undecided voters turn to last-minute research,
see what their answers were from the debates and on their website,
while others might just wait until voting day.
It may be when I walk into the voting booth before I make my final decision. I'm not sure.
From Concord, New Hampshire, Megan Leibowitz, Medill News Service.
And with that, I'd like to welcome in our panel here with us our 2 NBN contributors, Joshua Perry and Teresa Nowakowski. Now, Josh, I'm going to start with you. As we heard from Megan just a moment ago, a lot of voters are still undecided in New Hampshire and really the rest of the country. When do you think we're going to see a front runner emerge, if any?
I mean, who can say, to be honest? There's still so many players out in the crowded Democratic field that it's hard to tell. There are a few front runners, definitely. Bernie and Buttigieg definitely did well in Iowa, so we'll see, I suppose.
Teresa, do you think the results in New Hampshire, what comes out of this, might change, who's on top? Because right now, Bernie and Buttigieg after leading in Iowa, but is anything going to change after New Hampshire?
I think the field is definitely going to change. I think losing kind of those bona fide Iowa results meant that no one really dropped out of the race last week. So I think this is really going to be a decisive winnowing, but I don't know that it's necessarily going to pick out one singular frontrunner.
And let's talk about Joe Biden here for a minute. He said that he took a hit in Iowa after his 4th place finish and that he'd probably take one in New Hampshire too. He's not even sticking around for the results tonight, and he's actually going straight to South Carolina. Teresa, what do you make of this strategy?
Joe Biden, he's just not doing so hot right now. I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, I'm surprised we haven't seen any like campaign layoffs. He must just have a pretty well-funded campaign right now, but yeah, he's definitely just gonna have to keep moving forward because he's not doing so hot right now.
Yeah, and Josh, what do you make of him going right to South Carolina, not even sticking around?
I think he's just trying to cut his losses and move forward, but to be honest, I'm not really sure how much longer he can last.
And Josh, in New Hampshire, what message do you think it sends to voters in New Hampshire saying, yeah, I'm expecting to take a hit here before the primaries even take place? Is he going to lose some voters, by announcing that and taking that kind of strategy, saying, listen, I already know I'm probably not going to win before they even decide?
I think so. I think it shows that he's more concerned with winning the game than winning the voters.
And now it's clear that the youth vote will play an important role in this election. We've heard candidates speak directly to young voters. We've heard concerns around candidates being too old. And at campaign events in Iowa and New Hampshire, we've seen scores of young people coming out to hear candidates speak and offer their pitch for the presidency. This week, NNN's Olivia Olander was in New Hampshire and spoke to some of those young people about the election and their role.
This weekend, young voters from across New England were among the thousands of Americans that flocked to campaign rallies in New Hampshire.
It's nice for us that they're all coming here because it's a short drive up here from Rhode Island.
Many of these teens said they see New Hampshire's campaign season and position as the first primary state as a way to see the candidates up close and become more engaged in the political process.
We're really lucky to be able to drive up here and meet the candidates and really get to hear them speak because it's easier for us to make a decision. I know the rest of the country kind of has to follow in what we do.
AP government classes, college clubs, and high school student organizations all sent delegations to the Granite State.
We're here for a class that basically we went to all of the candidates to try and hear them speak and maybe figure out who we want to vote for.
We've been to Yang, Biden, Bernie. We're going to Trump tomorrow night too.
One college sophomore who has volunteered for the campaigns of both Pete Buttigieg and Elizabeth Warren said the energy in New Hampshire inspires her.
I mean, we're not from here, but I think just coming here and seeing all the young generation, even the older generation, just come out and vote and be involved in the community. I mean, it definitely motivates all of us to continue on doing our work.
The top issues among first-time voters that I spoke with: climate change.
That's something that my generation is going to have to deal with.
Gun control.
We hear about these shootings almost as scary and sad as it is way too frequently.
And educational issues such as student loans.
Paying for college is something that's coming up for me.
And for many at these Democratic campaign rallies, priority one is the same as it is with other groups of liberal voters.
Right now, who could beat Trump?
For these eager Democratic voters, voting means making their voices heard in a way that wasn't possible in 2016.
Oftentimes we're surrounded by many of our friends who aren't necessarily so invested in politics, so to come up to New Hampshire, it's a very inspiring sort of time to see so many young people out here and being so passionate, expressing their opinions.
In New Hampshire, Olivia Olander, Northwestern News Network.
Thanks, Olivia. So as she just mentioned, there's a lot of excitement among young voters, perhaps more than we've ever seen before. Josh, what impact do you think this is going to have in New Hampshire and states across the country?
I definitely think it's going to change the game a lot because so many of these progressive young voters are coming out. We'll probably see some favor toward candidates like Buttigieg and Warren over older Democrats like Biden. Yeah.
Now, obviously, there are quite a few both progressive and moderate Democrats all vying for the nomination. Do you think younger voters are approaching this year's primary with almost an added sense of responsibility, Teresa?
I think in some sense, yes. I think probably the biggest lesson from 2016 was that maybe the establishment isn't working, and so these young voters are coming in and thinking we are the future of the party, so we have to do these things almost more solemnly than maybe we've ever done them before. It's just a lot more of a sense of duty, I think.
Do you think we're going to see a higher voter turnout in general and a higher voter turnout in terms of the youth of the country?
I sure hope so.
And Josh, what about you? Do you think, finally after waiting 4 years, you're probably going to see, results? You're going to see Democrats heads at the polls. You're going to see a higher voter turnout this November and in the primary cycle?
I think so, and I also hope so, because after 4 years of Trump, I think a lot of young voters are ready to see change happen in the White House.
And they're really passionate about certain issues, mentioning gun control and education reform, and I think they're really coming out kind of in packs right now to kind of get that change that they want to see.
Certainly, and we're going to be back with more Politicat right after this break.
At Northwestern, we're Wildcats in every way.
Northwestern break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, spread for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
President Donald Trump was acquitted by the Senate on Wednesday for both abuse of power and obstruction charges in just the third impeachment trial in American history. And while Democrats and Republicans largely voted along party lines, there was one notable exception. Mitt Romney made history as the first senator to ever vote against a president of his own party, voting to find Trump guilty of abuse of power.
2 days later, Trump fired two of the key witnesses of the impeachment trial, former ambassador to the European Union Gordon Sondland and Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, who served as Director of European Affairs for the National Security Council. Vindman's brother was also fired from his NSC position, despite never having testified against President Trump. CNN reported that according to one of President Trump's advisors, the firings were meant to, quote, send a message that siding against the president will not be tolerated. And now I'd like to welcome back in our panel, Teresa, what do you make of that message, that siding against the president will not be tolerated?
I mean, that's kind of the message he's just been sending the whole time, and I think this is just another iteration of that. Like firing James Comey. He went on about trying to fire Robert Mueller at one point. I think it's just all part of this same game he's been playing since day one.
Josh, what do you make of this game that Teresa says that Trump has been playing since day one?
I mean, it feels a little bit totalitarian. That's obviously extreme, but his use of power is just not democratic. It's not responsible.
And I think it's especially interesting how Trump fired Vindman's brother as well. What was that, a too harsh move? Or like, why do you think that even happened in the first place?
I think that's just him trying to show how much power he has and really try and quash any sense of rebellion in the White House. And that's also a very bad sign, I think.
Yeah, even though he didn't even testify.
Right.
Do you know why, what motive that has, knowing that there wasn't really a real reason behind that firing?
I mean, who can say?
Yeah. Do you have any, Teresa, any thoughts on the firing of the brother as well?
I think that's definitely a Trump move. We've just been watching him kind of spiral out of control this whole time, and there's a reason that abuse of power was one of the charges in the impeachment trial.
And speaking of the abuse of power charge, as we mentioned earlier, Mitt Romney voted to find President Trump guilty of that abuse of power charge. What do you make of Romney being the sole Republican voting to convict President Trump?
I mean, wow, like one of the Republicans found a conscience? That was what was shocking to me, honestly, was that anyone would vote to actually convict, even on one charge, and it was Mitt Romney. So honestly, I was shocked, but I was also like pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
But in the same way that Trump was also acquitted, so I was super disappointed.
And Josh, he's also faced a lot of backlash from Republicans, being called Judas by some Republicans, including commentator Lou Dobbs. What do you make of this Republican backlash towards Romney as being the sole person to vote to convict President Trump?
I don't think it's unreasonable for someone to vote along what they think is right instead of party lines. I think that's a really good sign in the Republican Party.
What do you think this says, though, about the current political climate in America, that one person can, vote according to his conscience, saying, I believe he's guilty on this charge. I'm not necessarily going to go along party lines and still face, all of this criticism. What does that say about the current political climate?
I think it shows how dangerous the incredibly polarized partisan government we have now has become for people who want to do what they think is right.
Yeah, do you think the trajectory of his career is going to change from this, or what do you see happening from there?
I think he certainly has damaged his reputation within the Republican Party. So we'll have to see where he goes from here, but it's probably not going to be, upward.
Yeah, and I mean, thinking about, voting on morality versus party lines and how you can even face that kind of backlash, just what is that going to say in the future about, these kinds of trials and really it being, a fair trial. And he said, in his interview with the New York Times, just that, it was really about, this is what I believe, and if we can't, vote on what we believe, I'm just so curious, how that's going to go and, in the future trials and how the public is going to trust these trials.
Well, I certainly hope that more people take the route that Romney took and do what they think is right. And maybe if enough people do, then we'll be able to reverse this partisan trajectory that we're on.
Yeah. Teresa, do you think people are going to follow in Romney's footsteps and start to vote against party lines if that's what they truly believe? Or do you think people are kind of afraid and going to stay in the shadows with that?
I want them to take Romney's route, but me being the cynical person I am, I'm thinking that this partisan split is going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
Teresa, talking about the impeachment trial as a whole, what's it going to be remembered by? What are the lasting impressions that are going to come out of the past few weeks?
I think it's really difficult to say right now because we all know that history is happening, but we don't know how it'll be remembered in the moment. I think that this whole era is probably going to be recognized as a serious fault on everyone's part in America. Yeah.
Josh, do you think the impeachment is just going to be a footnote in terms of the Trump presidency, or is this what he's going to be remembered by?
I hope it's what he's remembered by, because I hope he won't get reelected come November. But it's certainly not a good thing to be remembered by.
Do you think it's going to impact his prospects or his chances at re-election? Or do you think almost that it's invigorated the base that, Republican supporters are saying, oh, look at the Democrats, they're all pushing for him to get impeached. This is ludicrous. Do you think it's going to help or hurt him come election time in November?
I think the impeachment is certainly a Rorschach test for the country. Republicans will think that it's him undermining the establishment, and Democrats will think it's a sure sign that he's underqualified. But I don't know. We'll just see what happens, I guess.
And Teresa, just want to get a quick answer for you before we go to break. Help or hurt Trump come November time in the election?
It's hard to say. I think Josh is right. It's definitely depends on whether you're a Republican or a Democrat.
All right. Thanks so much, and we'll be back with some more Politicat after this.
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
Northwestern break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, spread for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
At Northwestern University, we are pioneering innovation and achieving excellence across every imaginable discipline. At Northwestern University, the possibilities are endless.
Welcome back to Politicat. For this week's Money Minute, Zach Miller is here to talk about the economic implications of Brexit. Zach?
Thanks, Justin. On June 16, 2016, the United Kingdom narrowly voted to leave the European Union. At the time, it was unclear what an independent UK would look like. The European Union is responsible for nearly half of all British imports and exports. Workers have free access to travel through all member states with just a British passport. And nearly every economic sector benefits from low-cost trade with the rest of Europe, including manufacturing, medicine, tourism, and agriculture. Would secession mean walking away from these benefits? The answer to that question is still unclear. No agreement has been ratified yet. And 2 weeks ago, on January 31st, 3 years and 2 prime ministers after the original referendum, the United Kingdom has left the European Union. The The UK will continue to follow EU rules and regulations for the rest of 2020 until December 31st. During this transition period, politicians hope to sign a new free trade agreement into law. Without an agreement, the UK will be subject to tariffs and quotas, making it difficult to compete in European markets. Earlier today, Cabinet Minister Michael Gove, the tentative leader of these trade negotiations, admitted that the final deal would involve some friction. He warned companies that exports would be checked by customs and that regulatory red tape would be inevitable. Immigration and customs procedures also need to be finalized before the deadline. This includes the open issue of British passports, as well as the logistics of a hard border in Northern Ireland. However, due to conflicting alliances, negotiations with Ireland cannot be finalized until the UK concludes its deal with the European Union, and political parties in Northern Ireland, where the referendum failed by 8 points, have expressed no interest in cooperation. Legal challenges are sure to follow. Brexit negotiations will likely continue past the deadline and throughout the next decade, even after issues with the European Union are settled. The UK still needs to negotiate trade with other nations around the globe, which was the original goal of the referendum. In the coming years, we will see the true cost of taking back control. For Money Minute, I'm Zach Miller.
Thanks, Zach. And now we'd like to welcome back in our panel for this week's edition of Headlines. We're going to read you guys 3 headlines. 2 of them are true, 1 of them is not, and you guys have to pick out the lie. Are you guys ready to go?
Yeah.
All right, so number 1. There has been a push by Republicans in the West Virginia state legislature to expand their border by bringing in conservative counties in Virginia. Next, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that all Americans need to, quote, relax because American politics is, quote, too hectic. And finally, the former governor of Iowa took home $150,000 after winning the state lottery and almost forgot he bought the ticket. Which one is the lie?
I'm going to go with the first one.
You're going to go with the first one. So the West Virginia annexing chaos there.
Honestly, I'm going to go with that one too because I hope it's a lie. So deeply.
It is not a lie.
Of
That
course
is
it's
actually
not.
true. And
Both
also
wrong.
true, the former governor of Iowa did win $150,000 in the state lottery. Tom Vilsack, former Secretary of Agriculture under Obama, bought the lottery ticket, then realized a week later, I never checked my numbers. And he went on, and it ends up that he won $150,000. But the lie there, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau did not say Americans need to relax because politics are too hectic.
Just made up some quotes there. All right, so on to round 2. We're going to do again 2 truths, 1 lie. All right, so in response to a heckler at a Joe Biden campaign event in New Hampshire, Jill Biden stepped in to help push the protester away. All right, next, in the town of Dixville Notch, New Hampshire, 2 Democrats and 1 Republican voted for Michael Bloomberg, despite that he wasn't even on the ballot. And then 3, Andrew Yang said that if he was elected, he would be in favor of lowering the president's salary to account for his proposed universal basic income. What do we think? Josh, I'm going to start with you.
I'm going to go with Yang,
Okay,
the third one.
got it. Going to change Trump's salary. And
I'm going to have to
Teresa?
part with Josh. I'm going to go with Joe Biden on this one.
Okay.
I don't feel like she
You
would have
don't
gotten
think Jill
physically
Biden
involved.
came in there to save the day?
It doesn't seem like her brand.
Awesome. Well, it turns out that you are correct. It is Andrew Yang did not say that he would lower the Trump salary for his proposed basic income. But it is really important to note that Andrew Yang did just drop out of the race. And so that was announced. So he was no longer going to be in the running for the Democratic nominee.
Also, you just mentioned Dixville Notch, New Hampshire. You know, not notorious, but population 12 people. So they're famous for voting first in the state. And I believe 5 people showed up and 3 voted for Bloomberg. So just
wrote his name,
yeah,
I suppose.
Write-in candidate for Michael Bloomberg.
What do you
and
know?
one of them was Republican, 2 of them Democrats. So
12 people.
Yeah.
That's the first one
12
every year.
people population.
Wow. That is a
All right,
small
that's all for
county.
Headlines this week, and we're going to be back with the final word in just a moment.
At Northwestern, we're Wildcats in every way.
Go you Northwestern. Go Northwestern. as fine will we time. We will cheer you all the go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, spread for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
For this week's Final Word, Andrew Rowan is here to talk more about the Iowa Caucus app malfunction and what it means for politics and society as a whole. Andrew?
Thanks, Alexa. I'm stating the obvious here, but the world is getting more and more technologically advanced. People take notes on their tablets and laptops, mobile payments are growing, many even control parts of their house from their phone. But despite all these advancements, we really can't depend on technology. For example, here at NNN and at newsrooms across the country, we print out physical scripts so we're not scrambling in the event our teleprompter and computer let us down. And that brings me to tonight's point about technology and the Iowa caucuses. As you likely know, an app meant to speed up the vote tally for the Iowa caucus actually did the opposite, breaking down and causing a huge delay in the reporting of the results. There's no better example of technology not working as it was intended. Now, the Iowa Democratic Party had the right idea. It should have been fairly easy to use technology to calculate numbers from across the state. But the Iowa Democratic Party was forced to use its backup plan, pen and paper. And whenever technology is involved and the stakes are high, people must have backup plans. And I see that as a problem. As technology enters spaces with higher stakes, it just needs to work. In the future, when computers are driving your car or a robot is performing your surgery, it can't fall back on pen and paper. While I know lots of different companies develop different technologies, it's important that innovation continues to happen in our society, and we need to make sure that our technology infrastructure is strong to support that innovation, so we can really count on technology to get the job done. Justin, Alexa?
All right, thanks so much, Andrew. And it's interesting to note as well that Nevada originally planned to use a similar app for its caucus, but nixed the idea after the events in Iowa. And according to a precinct chair, Andrew, in Nevada, there was never a backup plan. You talked about backup plans. There was never a backup plan explained during training. It was always assumed that they were going to use the app.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's 2020 and we're still saying pen and paper is the way to go. Yeah. Who knows?
All right, thanks so much, Andrew. And that's all the time we have for this week on Politicat. I'm Justin Sweetwood.
And I'm Alexa McHale. Thank you for joining us and have a great night.